Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Package Tourist, hosted by yours truly, the Package Tourist and the magical mystery tour called Life, Matthew DiBiase. Tonight's guest is author David Sumner. David lives in Anderson, Indiana, and was a former professor of journalism at Ball State University for 25 years. Tonight, we will be discussing David's latest book, which was released today, titled The Rise, Fall, and Future of Florida's Citrus Industry. David, welcome back to the show. It's a great honor and privilege to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. Let me start off by asking you, David, what led you to write the history of Florida's citrus industry?
Well, I grew up in the Florida citrus industry, basically. My father, two grandfathers, and three uncles were citrus growers. And I watched its tragic decline over the last 30 years, wanted to know and be able to explain the reasons. I didn't see any other books that covered this. And I realized most people outside of Florida don't know how bad the industry has suffered, mostly to diseases in the last 30 years.
Okay. Now, David, what sources did you use to write this book?
Well, I live in Indiana now, but mainly because I taught here for 25 years. But I made 3 visits to Florida during the summer. I did 53 interviews with 36 growers and leaders in the industry. And I also used archives from the University of Florida, Florida Southern College, and the University of South Florida. And I also used the newspaper database, newspapers.com, which is wonderful for doing historical research.
Okay. David, how intrinsic are oranges in the state of Florida's cultural identity?
Everywhere. You can't separate Florida's image in pop culture from oranges. And the title of my first chapter is Oranges in Popular Culture. Oranges are on the state's license plate, and they're the state's official flower is the orange blossom. You can buy orange blossom honey and orange blossom perfume all over the world. Driving into Florida on any of the 3 interstates, you can stop and get a free glass of orange or grapefruit juice. And if you like football, you can go to the Orange Bowl in Miami or the Citrus Bowl in Orlando at the end of every season.
Okay. Now, were citrus trees native to Florida before European colonization, or were citrus trees introduced by the European colonists?
They originated in China and India and then spread to Spain and Europe and were brought to the U.S. probably by Spanish explorers in the 17th century. It really didn't begin to develop as an organized industry until after the Civil War with the coming of railroads and nationwide shipping.
Okay. David, how has citrus greening devastated the industry?
Well, first it's caused by a tiny insect called the Asian citrus psyllid, which injects its poison into the leaves. And it's kind of like a poison getting into your blood system, because first it kills the fruit and then it kills the tree. So total production in boxes of fruit is less than 10% of what it was in the year 2000.
Now, the pest that you describe, is that native to Florida, or was it brought in from the outside world?
It was brought in from the outside world. Most sources identify China.
Okay. David, please describe the early years of Florida's citrus industry. Who were the big magnates when it all began?
Well, there's several of them, and I really wouldn't have time to explain all of them. I'll just mention one to begin with. Henry Sanford. He was born into a wealthy Connecticut family. He was Lincoln's ambassador to Belgium. And then he moved to Florida and purchased 12,000 acres of land and planted orange and grapefruit trees. He even established a London office to encourage Europeans to settle and invest in Florida. And he founded and planned the town of Sanford, not far from Orlando, which at one time was in the middle of the citrus belt. And he played an influential role in developing some of the early varieties of oranges and was generous in helping other growers get started in the business. One more I'd like to mention, whose name you would never expect to hear, was the abolitionist Harriet Beecher Stowe, whose home, her home was in Connecticut, but she and her husband bought an orange grove near Jacksonville after the Civil War, and they lived there for almost 20 years. And during this time, she published 57 letters and articles about the beauty and virtues of Florida and Florida citrus. And most of them were republished in her book titled Palmetto Leaves. And before she published the book, she said that Florida had 14,000 tourists, and the next year the number grew to 40,000. But she had a very interesting cryptic motive, because she wanted to encourage racially intolerant Northerners to move and invest in Florida, because there was a book by that title called Calling Yankees to Florida, Harriet Beecher Stowe's Forgotten Tourist Articles.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, and so at that time, Florida was split, was about 96,000 whites and 92,000 African Americans. But here's one of the most interesting statistics I came along. She was successful because most of Florida's early pioneers came from out of state. Philadelphia, New York, Boston, the Midwest. Among more than 200 men and women listed in the Florida Citrus Hall of Fame, 72 were born before 1900, and only 12 of these were native Floridians, and about 85% came from out of state. So
wow.
There was a big boom. Everybody was kind of like the gold rush. Everybody was wanting to come to Florida to make money in citrus after the Civil War.
Okay. How did the University of Florida help the citrus industry, David?
The university was founded in 1905, and since then it's had a huge impact. It besides its College of Agriculture, it employs extension agents, citrus extension agents, in all 67 counties. And their job is to advise growers and other farmers about the latest research in how to grow healthy fruit. And then about 1920, the university established a dozen citrus research and education centers throughout the state that employed researchers who had full faculty status and actually had classes at those centers. And they did a lot of advising and seminars for growers as well.
Okay. Now, what natural disasters and environmental hazards have threatened Florida's citrus industry throughout the decades and centuries?
Well, originally I was going to call this book Freezes, Diseases, and Hurricanes, because hardly a year has passed since 1865 when one part of Florida wasn't battling freezes, diseases, or hurricanes, and sometimes droughts. And I watched my families fight these battles in their citrus business when I was growing up. And I decided I didn't want to enter a profession that depended so much on the weather for its success. It's a lot of hard work and sometimes a lot of heartache.
Okay. Now, with global warming taking place today, is that our key factor in the decline of Florida's citrus industry, in your opinion?
No, I wouldn't say it is. I mean, no, I can't establish a direct connection with global warming unless there's a connection between hurricanes and global warming, which there may be. I mean, there were 4 or 5 hurricanes in 2005, 2006, which helped spread the citrus canker and citrus greening disease. And then there was been 3 within the last year. But it's irregular. It's not like every year. They'll go 10 years with hardly a damaging hurricane. Okay. So I don't have a clear answer on that.
Okay. David, what led to the golden age of citrus from 1950 to 1980?
Yeah, that was when I was growing up. And my dad did very well in his business during those years. The first answer is that the economy, U.S. economy, is booming. And the second was, there was a baby boom, and babies needed orange juice. There was a huge demand for orange juice and food products. The second answer was the invention of frozen concentrated orange juice in the 40s that was called Florida Cinderella product, and I devoted a full chapter to that, the 40s, because before concentrated juice was invented, about 95% of Florida's oranges were sold on the fresh fruit market. But within 10 to 15 years, about 95% of the fruit was processed for concentrate or other types of chilled juices, not from concentrate. But most people don't know much about concentrate now because it began losing popularity in the 70s when pasteurized and not from concentrate became, they call them chilled juices in the industry. And only about 5% of Florida's citrus today is sold on the fresh market, and the rest of it is processed for juice.
Okay. Please tell our audience about the beverage wars of the 1970s and the 1980s.
Yeah, I really, using the word war is not too strong of a word because there was a huge amount of competition that entered the drink industry, the beverage industry. Per capita consumption of orange juice started declining in the 70s, and it's never gone back up. And just in the last 20 years, it has declined from 5 gallons per capita to about 2 gallons per capita.
Wow.
So, yeah, really, there's a growing range of competitors: bottled water, energy drinks, and artificially flavored fruit beverages that contain 0% juice. Bottled water consumption, interesting statistic here, grew every year between 1977 and 2022 and had 17 years of consecutive double-digit percentage growth. A great irony, one of the more interesting facts that came up, Gatorade, which is one of orange juice's biggest competitors, was invented by researchers at the University of Florida, and it contains 0% fruit juice. So it's a lot of competition out there for beverages.
Okay.
And I'm not even talking about coffee or alcohol or soft drinks.
Okay. David, during your research, who were the most progressive and most innovative figures in the development and growth and promotion of the Florida citrus industry? Any key figures?
Well, I mentioned Henry Sanford and Harriet Beecher Stowe. When I was thinking about this question, I would say there was a senator and governor named Spencer Holland back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. He started out as a state senator in the 30s and helped found the Florida Citrus Commission, which is the most powerful citrus organization in the state. Later as governor, he helped make sure that the U.S. military purchased large amounts of citrus products from our troops, and for the Lend-Lease aid program in Europe. And as a U.S. senator, which he did, he held this office for about 15 years. He is remembered as the father of the 24th Amendment, which abolished the poll tax.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah. Another interesting fact I just found recently, he was the first person born in Florida, the first native Floridian to serve as governor and as U.S. senator, and that was 100 years after Florida became a state.
Wow.
And so Florida is really full of transplants. People coming from the north to make money, to get rich. And, back then they were. Now it's mostly for leisure, to spend their retirement money. But somewhere the figure about 15 or 20% of Florida's population are native Floridians.
Okay. Since it's May 1st, European Labor Day, let's talk about labor. talk about what type of labor is involved in the cultivation of the Florida citrus industry? During your research, were there any major labor issues or strikes or occupational hazards?
Well, there are labor issues. It's basically been a shortage of labor. Almost all growers, and I've had several interviews and conversations on this topic with growers, and all the large growers rely on it's called the H-2A guest worker program, which is highly regulated by the labor department. Mm-hmm. So it has strict oversight, and growers bring workers, legal workers from Mexico and the Caribbean, and they're required to provide airfare, local transportation, housing, medical care, and a guaranteed minimum wage, about 15% higher, 15 or 20% higher than the state minimum wage. In all the interviews I conducted, I never heard of a grower who used undocumented or illegal immigrants, and really quite the opposite. The problem they had is that workers came here legally under this guest worker program, and they abscond and don't go back to their home countries, and they get jobs in the construction industry, which is much higher pay. I mean, it's not widespread, but I heard a couple of people interviewed talking about that. So the growers have to apply to this program, and it has to be approved, and they have to show evidence that they've advertised for domestic workers and couldn't get any. And all growers I interviewed said that no domestic Americans ever apply for orange picking jobs. And I think a lot of it's seasonal work. It's only, the harvesting season only lasts from about November to May. And so that's one of the reasons they can't get domestic workers. And, I picked oranges when I was growing up, one Christmas vacation, and it's really hard work. You climb up on a ladder, and you're picking fruit and putting them into a big canvas bag strapped over your shoulder, and when it gets full, it weighs about 50 pounds, and you go down the ladder and dump it into a big bucket, and you do it over and over again, all day. Okay. So,
yeah. What you mentioned earlier, please tell our listeners, what is the present state of Florida's citrus industry right now, and how do you see it down the road? Do you think it could get better, or do you think it's just going to get worse? What is your analysis, David?
Well, here's my simple analysis. It's terrible shape right now, but there is some hope and some optimism, and I've devoted my last chapter called The Road to Recovery. And citrus researchers are really busy at work trying to find and breed a disease-resistant tree. And the state has poured a lot of money, and the USDA as well, poured a lot of money into research to pay for research grants. And it will take 5 to 7, there are a lot of trees they believe are disease-resistant that are in the trial stages now. But it takes 5 to 7 years for them to mature and to know for sure if they won't get the green disease. So there's a lot of optimism around that, and there are also some interim measures. One is called cups or citrus under protective coverings. They're screens that literally cover a tree, and they keep out the ciliates and other insects and diseases. And, when I drove across South Florida last summer, I could look out and see these screens over, some of them over smaller trees, and sometimes they have big screens that cover an entire grove. And they generally do a pretty good job of keeping out the insects and the diseases. But those were interim measures, and they're still, they're looking for a permanent measure, which is a disease-resistant tree with not too genetic. The researchers I talked to say it's not a genetically modified organism, where you bring in a foreign substance into the genes, but they manipulate existing genes somehow so that they'll be resistant to the disease.
Okay. David, please tell our audience, where can readers find this book?
It's at barnesandnoble.com, bn.com, and it's a 336-page book, and the paperback is $14.95, and the hardback is $24.95, and it's only at Barnes and Noble right now. It's not. It may be on Amazon in a few weeks, but it's not yet.
David, any idea what your next book project will be, and when can we expect its release?
Well, I wish I knew. It's a little too soon to answer that question. And the books I've written, I've never come up with an idea until I finished the last book. So I'm still busy doing marketing and promotion, and I'll be giving some speeches in Florida about the book in June. But there are two criteria that I have to meet, or any author really. It has to be a subject that grabs me emotionally. It's something I care about writing about, but also one that has a chance of fulfilling a need in the marketplace. And it's extremely difficult to find a subject that meets both criteria. So I'm thinking about it, but no ideas yet.
Okay. Well, keep me posted, David, and when you come up with your next book, I want you on my show again, okay?
Okay, well, it's always a pleasure. You ask good questions.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that. You take care, and you have a lovely spring and summer, okay?
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen, for next week's show where I'll be interviewing author James Metz. Thank you and good night.